So, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. This is our second doctoral meeting on aerospace, on the PhD program on aerospace science and technology. Today we're going to be discussing about propulsion and the space environment. We have 7 presentations of 7 PhD students, namely Alberto Marin, Alberto Modesti, Enrique Bello, Jesus Perales, Marco Ricardo Inchingolo, sorry for the pronunciation, Pedro José Jiménez, and Tatiana Pegotin. They are doing different PhD theses on um, electric propulsion, both numerical and experimental, and they're going to be telling us what they have done so far in the first, second year of their PhD thesis. The goal of these doctoral meetings is to gather together, to get to know what the PhD students are doing, for you PhD students to share your progress with your supervisors, a qualified audience in the department, faculty people, but also your peers, other PhD students, so that you can also get to know what others are doing, have discussions and foster collaborations and exchange of ideas, which is a very important part of our research. So now, having said that, I would like to thank you all for being here.
Okay, hello, so my name is Marco Inchingolo. The title of my thesis is Design, Development and Characterization of a Microwave Electrodress Plasma Thruster. My advisors are Jaume Navarro and Mario Merino. So this presentation is going to be structured as follows. So initially I will talk a bit about the context of my thesis, and then I will explain very briefly the working principle of the ECR thruster, which already Pedro mentioned before, so that the goals of the thesis can be easier understood. Then I will focus on the 3 main aspects that are involved in my thesis, which are the thruster design, the plasma simulation, and the experimental activities. And then I will go slightly to the future works about this and probably next year. Okay, so about the context, as people already mentioned in the previous presentations, currently used plasma thrusters are mainly ion thruster and all thrusters. Both of these thrusters have quite high efficiency compared to other kinds, but their problem is that they present electrodes which are typically exposed to the plasma. This limits the lifetime itself of the thruster because the electrodes are eroded with time. So for this reason, people are starting to be interested into electrodeless plasma propulsion. In particular, we have technology like the VASIM, but also the Helicon, which we are currently studying with the work of Jaume and Sener, and also the now ECR thruster that is the topic of my thesis. So the electron cyclotron resonance thruster was first researched in the 60s by NASA, but was then soon abandoned because of the better performances of ion thruster and all thruster. That way, they were also being investigated in that period. But ECR thruster came back in the interest of the scientific community, thanks to the work of Onera with a coaxial version of ECR thruster, which we can see here in the bottom. And in the context of the Minotaur project, Alvaro Sanchez designed a wave plasma coupling module for our hyphen code, which was mentioned many times in today. In order to simulate the performances of this coaxial version of the ECR thruster. The problem with this thruster is that it cannot be really considered electrodeless, so it loses a bit the advantages of an electrodeless thruster because it presents an antenna in the middle of the plume, which is eroded also with time. So what we want to do with my thesis is use another version of a ECR thruster, which is actually a waveguide thruster, which doesn't present any electron at all. This is being done in the context of the Prometeo project, which is a collaboration between the National Fusion Laboratory and our group, in which first we are going to develop this ECR electrodeless thruster, but also in going to study plasma turbulence, anomalous transport, and plasma wall and plasma wave interaction, which was mentioned also by the other students today. So my thesis is a more an experimental thesis focused on the development of the electrodeless ECR thruster. So the working principle of the ECR thruster basically relies on two principles, the ECR, the electron cyclotron resonance, and the magnetic nozzle. The electron cyclotron resonance is responsible of energizing the plasma. This happens in a specific region dictated by the frequency of the applied electromagnetic wave, typically in the form of microwaves, and the magnetic field. In order to convert this thermal energy acquired by the electrons in the form of ion energy, we need a magnetic nozzle which does this conversion and create an ambipolar field to accelerate the ions. As mentioned, so there are multiple advantages of these thrusters, hypothetical advantages. So first of all, we don't need any electrodes, so we have a longer lifetime, but we can also work with arbitrary propellant since we don't have an hollow cathode, which is usually limiting the use of alternative propellants. Also, the only power supply needed for this thruster is the microwave power supply, and thus it will probably reduce the cost of this device if it's actually going to be used in the market. Okay, so now the goals of the thesis are divided into many objectives, but first of all, we want to improve our current understanding of the electrodeless thrusters. In particular, we want to understand why this thruster present such a low efficiency compared to the typical devices like Hall thruster and ion thrusters. But also there are many aspects of the magnetic nozzle and plasma wave coupling that are not well understood, as mentioned by Pedro. So this is going to be done in 3 steps. So first of all, I'm going to design the ECR thruster prototype. Then I performed simulations of this prototype using the hyphen code. And then things that is starting now is the experimental characterization of the prototype, as you can see in the picture. So I will go through these 3 steps now, trying to be as short as possible. So here we can see the final thruster, the final design of the final prototype. So we can you see the pointer?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can see the point.
You can see the mouse as well.
Well, okay, so here in this section we see the waveguide from which the microwaves are coming from. Here there is in the back there is not shown, but there is all the transmission line bringing the microwaves to the thruster, this is the plasma chamber, and the two are separated by a quartz window in order to let only the microwave pass into the thruster, but preventing the backflow of the propellant. The magnetic field necessary for the magnetic nozzle and the resonance is created by just the permanent magnet, and then if we want to tune the shape of the magnetic nozzle, we can use this coil. So the design of the prototype was mainly led by the choice of the microwave frequency, since first of all it was the most expensive part of the assembly, but also the choice of the microwave frequency influences the dimension of the thruster and also the magnitude of the magnetic field. Finally, it was chosen 5.8 gigahertz because it allows us to reduce a lot the dimension of the thruster to 36 millimeter compared to the 8 centimeter diameter that was necessary if we wanted to use the 2.4 gigahertz classical microwave frequency. So here we can see the complete assembly installed in the vacuum chamber in form of a CAD model. So we can distinguish the different components in the transmission line. So we see the magnetron generator, including the isolator for protecting the microwave generator from the reflections. Then the bidirectional coupler is used to to measure the power coupled to the thruster, and then we have a matching network to improve the reflections going back, so that we can measure better what is actually the power delivered to the thruster. And then we have the vacuum chamber side containing a DC block and the ECR thruster itself. So as I mentioned, I also performed during the first COVID quarantine some hyphen simulations, so using the hyphen code. As we said many times today, the hyphen code is capable of simulating a variety of thruster, all thruster, cylindrical all thruster, helicon plasma thruster, but also coaxial ECR thruster. This code has never been used for simulating a waveguide ECR thruster, so I had to implement this simulation scenario. But since at the time the plasma wave coupling module was not ready yet for simulating this wave propagation mode, I imposed a custom power deposition map. So I evaluated then the performances of my prototype using this software, so that we can later compare with the experiment. So here we can see a basic example of an hyphen result. So here, this is the magnetic field align mesh for the electron fluid, and this is the peak mesh for the EV species. So this is the plasma chamber, and this is the plume. So as I mentioned, I had to impose a power deposition map, which you can see here. So we are hitting more the region close to the axis, and the results that we obtain are typically in this form. So we see an increase of the electron temperature close to the axis, and and also the density is increasing towards the wall and not in the center. These effects affect the overall simulation, and so we understood that the power deposition map that we impose is very important, and it needs to be characterized well in order to have a realistic simulations. This is a subject of future works to use the code implemented by Pedro in Aachen. So going instead to the experimental activities. So after the prototype was designed, it was manufactured, and finally last March we managed to have time for doing the first experimental campaign. So this experimental campaign lasted 3 weeks, but already in the first day we managed to obtain the first ignition. For this reason, we proceeded with which was the main objective of the campaign. So for this reason, we proceeded to characterize the plume for different working points. So we used the Faraday cup and Langmuir probe to scan the plume at the points that we thought to be interesting, and we did this varying the power, the mass flow rate, and the coil current, so that we can vary the shape of the magnetic nozzle. Here we can see some picture of the assembly. This is the transmission line in the outside, so the air side of the vacuum chamber. This is the thruster installed in the vacuum chamber, and this is the polar probe system on which the plasma probes are mounted. This is the Faraday cup, and this is the Langmuir probe. Here instead we can see the thruster in operation. We detected three operational modes, and this is the best one, which is actually producing some thrust. We don't know about the others. Because these were obtained at the beginning of the campaign, and we finally solved the problem involved with them. Okay, so here I present some of the fun picture about the experimental results. So we can see that going towards the bottom, we are increasing the power, and here we are increasing the propellant mass flow rate. So we notice first thing is that increasing the mass flow rate, the plume clearly becomes more reddish. This is a clear indicator that the plasma temperature is decreasing. Also, we notice that the plume is opening, and the hollow region is starting to appear in the central region. This is not only a visual effect, but it was also seen in the
in the Faraday cap measurement. Also, as I mentioned, we vary the coil current, as we can see here. So the coil current increases decreasing the divergence of the magnetic nozzle. So in fact, this we can see clearly what happens going towards this direction. Instead, putting a negative current did the opposite effect, enlarging the plume. This is a clearly unexpected result. Instead, in fact, if we watch what happens to the magnetic field topology when the coil current is varied, we can see that this is the effect that is happening. So the plume divergence is decreasing. I have several other results, so if you are interested, I can show during the question section. So for concerning the future works, we are scheduling a second test campaign in the next autumn, and we aim to try a new kind of injectors. So previously we used a double injector. It is probably visible here. But we want to do now a fully axisymmetric injection in this way. Also, we're going to use a thrust balance for measuring the actual thrust and the thrust efficiency of the device. Soon I'm going to prepare a journal paper based on the results that I presented at the SPC conference about the hyphen simulation that I performed. And after this next campaign, I will probably work on a journal paper based on these experimental data. Next year, we are going for sure to implement this new wave plasma coupling module in my simulations so that I can have a more realistic simulation of the thruster. And for sure, we're going to iterate also on the design and to finally assess the main question in the main research question of my thesis. So thank you.